Hello, everyone. Um, I've begun recording this content initially about a month or so ago. Initially in preparation for the upcoming academic year, and as a way for me to kind of foresee and forestall potential disruptions to in-person university exercises. In the unhappy event that COVID should make a new beginning in the Boston area. This way I thought, that I'd have something in place, a clearinghouse of sorts, for mini lectures that my students may refer to, should we end up switching to remote instruction. But I'm beginning to, unfortunate for you, I'm beginning to like this format and may continue posting not only on academic stuff within an area I feel comfortable with, not necessarily I'm qualified for, but also perhaps precisely to branch out and intrude onto the ideas and well-protected preserves of others. I was struck and amused in a way by early on what I think might have been a troll on my YouTube channel who left me the following comment on episode 3, which was titled the Error of Greater Lebanon. She wrote the following, and I quote, "Your right-wing views are thankfully only shared by a tiny minority of Lebanese. Your unfortunate sectarian views are the reason why Lebanon is where it is today. Lebanon is better without the likes of you." Firstly, I should admit that I actually agree that perhaps Lebanon is better off without the likes of me intruding on it and taking to task the charitable, woke, left-wing work of the narco-terrorist group Hezbollah. So definitely they're better off without me. But that was not the topic of the post. If you have the patience to go back to it and delve into it, I was not issuing a political or a personal view, right-wing or otherwise. But perhaps this person has a tenuous relationship with the English language, and that's fine. That's not an accusation. There are many languages I often wished I knew, or wished I could have known better, or wished I could have had a better relationship with. English and French are among them. But whatever that person's level of English listening comprehension, she or he ought to have paid attention, I think, to the fact that episode 3 in particular was dealing with pure, unadulterated historical fact. I was introducing historical text verbatim. There was not one iota of partisan politics in it, left or right. Just a couple of historical texts, left unperturbed, unintruded upon, presented to those watching or listening, simply to weigh in on them as they please. I wasn't making a political statement, and it was certainly not left-wing and not right-wing. There was no wing at all. For the rest, I think accusing someone of being right-wing or left-wing, for that matter, simply because you disagree with them or because they advance fact, or for that matter, personal views that differ from what you consider your adamantine truth, is more often than not a commentary on your own demagogic approach to life, not your interlocutor's view of the world or alternate opinions on things. But I thought that this notion of left and right ought to make for a good topic of conversation, especially relative to left and right in Lebanon, because I see that there's, a lot of people sort of in Lebanon brand each other, brand themselves, and brand others left-wing or right-wing. So, to clarify a couple of housekeeping issues, I take no offense whatever at being assigned to either left-wing or right-wing ideas. I belong to neither. As an elector, I vote in favor of liberal questions as much as I do conservative questions. What interests me are ideas, the quest for knowledge, good governance, good policy, and information. Not doctrines, not doctrinaires, not dogmas, and not demagogues. I often seek information against my own grain. On conservative issues, I often seek out a liberal outlook. On liberal issues, I try to understand the conservative counterpoint. On issues of faith and religion, I like to hear the point of view of theists and atheists alike. And I try to get my knowledge from those whose opinions I don't necessarily share. I attribute this to my Catholic upbringing, my Jesuit education. I should tell you the story of back in the time when I was still in high school in Lebanon. I must have been 15, 16. We have catechism in Lebanon every Thursday. We had to go to catechism, and I decided one day that, I didn't want to do catechism anymore. So I tell the priest teaching us, Father, I don't want to do catechism anymore. Can you excuse me? He's like, if you have a good excuse, I'll excuse you. So I told him, thinking I would offend him and he would kick me out of class. I told him that I was a devil worshiper and I wasn't into this Jesus stuff. So instead of kicking me out, he said, devil worshipping, very interesting. Tell me about it. I'm really interested in it. And I didn't know the first thing about devil worshipping. I had never worshipped a devil. I don't know what devil worshipping is. And I was dumbfounded. But I was also struck by his openness and open-mindedness and his curiosity. And it made me curious. It made me more curious about catechism. And I ended up never leaving catechism. And this priest ended up being one of the main influences on my life. And I actually, at a time, because of how cool he was like the kind of guy, hey, man, can you play any Zeppelin? So, he taught me my first chords on the guitar. He rode a motorcycle at the time. I'm talking late 70s Lebanon. So, a priest who rides a Harley Davidson is pretty cool stuff. So because of this guy, he broadened my world of references, my worldviews. I even thought of joining the priesthood because of him. I was like, if this is the priesthood, I want in. And he was actually the guy who talked me out of it. So I was trying to talk him into getting me out of catechism. He talked me into staying in catechism, and ultimately he talked to me about staying out of the priesthood. And, essentially he said, you want to serve human beings, there are many ways you could serve human beings. So in a lot of ways I attribute, the place I am today, in many ways I attribute it to him. In any case, I have no interest in echo chambers. I have no interest in, people agreeing with me or repeating what I say or adulating me for what I say, or I have no interest in, reading newspapers or opinion pieces that get me to think what I'm already thinking, believe what I already believe. I see no benefit in holding up my deeply held assumptions against the assumptions of those who already share my assumptions. Indeed, what I'm interested in is rubbing my convictions against what is their antithesis, chafing them against what is anathema to them, against a variety of opinions, convictions, information, data, so as to reflect on my own assumptions and draw new conclusions. That is, I think, what the Jesuits call discernment. I see my role as an academic and the role of academic work as that of raising new questions about old materials and old answers, as opposed to suppressing or keeping the tabs on a contrarian perspective on old stories and taking old assumptions as a given, as a reflection of an immutable law of nature. Lebanon is one such given, as is, for that matter, the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is treated and defined often with platitudes and jingles and oversimplifications, a topic that is more commonly discussed than it is explained or adequately explained. And that's why thinking about Lebanon or talking about Lebanon often becomes coercion into a single, uniform, specific line of thinking and an assault on those who raise new questions, challenging old orthodoxies. And that's where the right-wing or sectarian calumny comes, as opposed to, say, woke left-wing, which is supposedly better than right-wing. Your right-wing views are thankfully only shared by a tiny minority of Lebanese, I was told, and your unfortunate sectarian views are the reason why Lebanon is where it is today. Lebanon is better off without the likes of you. You've given me more credit than I deserve. And so to my accuser, I have no interest in ideological parties, left or right, and if one thinks right-wing in a Lebanese context is some sort of opprobrium, then let me suggest it may be worth your while to bone up on the origins, history, meanings, and iterations of the term right-wing in Lebanon and elsewhere, and try identifying whose policies and worldviews in Lebanon are right-wing and whose are left-wing. And please let me know, once you've done that research, let me know what you come up with. Let me know if you have the moral integrity to denounce, say, left-wing Palestinians and PSPs and Baathists and SSNP irredentist fascists in Lebanon who murdered tens of thousands of innocent Lebanese in the same left-wing attitudes and in the name of left-wing principles. And I'd be interested in knowing if you would be okay as a non-right-wing, if you would be okay denouncing, say, Soviet-style left-wing concentration camps and gulags, or left-wing PLO or left-wing Baathist mass killings and mass graves where millions and tens of thousands of innocent dissenters perished? Or ought we be content with the way left-wing woke rhetorical artifice presents itself, that left-wing style concentration camps or cultural revolutions or great leaps forward had a noble mission, and in that sense had excuses because ugly means justify a noble end. Unfortunately, virtue signaling platitudes about social justice and anti-racism and liberalism and intersectionality, while accusing others of being right-wing and equating right-wing with something abhorrent, is part and parcel of our times, and our times' perversions of reality. It's a devious, and I would say a totalitarian fascist method of muzzling honest, constructive public discourse. Left and right-wing categories are meaningless in the Middle East. Let's get this out of the way. Left-wing, right-wing are meaningless. These categorizations are meaningless in the Middle East. They're even, as one eminent historian of the Middle East noted, they're even meaningless in their birthplace, in France, in Europe, but specifically in France itself, where those terms were born. At their origin, The phrases left and right wing describe the seating arrangement at the French National Assembly after the French Revolution. On the left sat usually the revolutionaries, the Jacobins of the French Revolution, and on the right sat the less radical revolutionaries, among them perhaps the Girondins, but also other moderates, merchants, businessmen, intellectuals, journalists, jurists, industrialists, laborers, farmers, who were more open to civil debate than the stricter Jacobins, and perhaps were even more amenable to a modus vivendi with a constitutional monarchy, as opposed to beheading the monarchy. In Lebanon, as elsewhere in the world, these left and right wing terms specific to France and the French Revolution were disfigured beyond recognition and reshaped and altered to mean left is good and right is nasty. In Lebanon, this description is pushed beyond the pale so that during the so-called Civil War of 1975-1989, left-wing came to mean poor, downtrodden, but secular, progressive Muslim groups, and right-wing became the choice invective describing so-called rich, sectarian, reactionary Christians. I don't know if you're following this kind of grotesque mischaracterization. So left-wing Muslim progressive, right-wing Christian retrograde. In a post-religious West, the label Christian is, by definition, bad, identified with the West, and consequently with Western colonialism. Never mind that the institution of colonialism itself was invented and perfected in the East. It's not a Western concept. And so, from this we get that Lebanese Christians are perforce a spawn of the West, therefore they are whites, and therefore unimaginable, in the position of victims. The notion of victimizer in the Middle East is turned on its head because of these distortions. What matters in the Middle East is not the victim, but the victimizer. If the victimizer is presumed to be a Muslim and therefore non-white, the world does not move a finger to voice its righteous indignation. If, on the other hand, the victimizer is a Christian, or a Jew for that matter, and therefore associated with whiteness, then all hell breaks loose in Western chancelleries to denounce the white racist colonizer. Never mind that Jews and Christians are the first nations of the Middle East, and the dominant ethnos, those who are not Jews and Christians, are descendants of colonial interlopers. That's, to put things in very, very simple terms. But fact does not matter in post-modernist conceptions of the Near and Middle East. Let me illustrate. And please forgive the oversimplification, but without oversimplifications, there is no understanding of complex issues. Here's the illustration. The Muslims in Lebanon, namely the Sunnis, but also many Shia, are among the country's wealthiest communities, home to arguably the largest concentrations of bourgeois, conservative, not to say reactionary, confessional thinking in the land. Yet, Muslims are deemed Lebanon's perennial victims of Christian rapacity and are therefore progressive, secular, woke left-wingers. In today's parlance, Walid Jumblad's PSP, the Progressive Socialist Party, which is by all definitions a sectarian, Druze, reactionary, feudal organization by any measure, it is deemed left-wing simply because it calls itself Parti Socialiste Progressiste, PSP. Meanwhile, its hereditary leadership is among Lebanon's oldest, richest land-owning feudal families. In 1977, left-wing followers of the PSP's assassinated leftist leader, Kamal Jumblat, avenged his murder, which the Syrians perpetrated, by the way, his Syrian allies. They avenged his murder by murdering close to 200 Christian villagers in the Shuf Mountains. This is the same Kamal Jumblat, the principled left-wing darling of the Socialist International, who in an interview with Al-Bayraq in 1977 spoke warmly of another fellow leftist, Adolf Hitler, noting that had he been alive, quote, Hitler would have at least saved us from the Zionists, end quote, concluding that, quote, Nazism ought to be revived somewhat, end quote. Wait, it does get better. When in 1983, Italian journalist Lucio Lamy visited Walid Jumblat's Mukhtara mansion, Walid Jumblat, the son of the assassinated leader Kamal Jumblat. When this Italian journalist visited the Mukhtara mansion of Walid Jumblat, he wondered why Walid Bek's walls were covered with portraits of Adolf Hitler. Without missing a beat, Jumblat quipped why, because he was, after all, one of the greatest leaders Europe had, end quote. And so, it seems that Lebanon's leftists, like leftists everywhere nowadays, are not only fond of the gulags and Soviet-style concentration camps and cultural revolutions and great leaps forward, where millions of innocents perished, but they're also fond of Hitler's final solution, which might have at least rid us of the Zionists. Conversely, and this is still my illustration here with fact, Lebanon's Christians, among whom one can count the country's poorest, in a community that is considered right-wing, but a community that introduced not only to Lebanon, but to the entire Middle East, this right-wing community, introduced such progressive, woke ideas as secularism, universal suffrage, democratic values, separation of powers, separation of church and state, minority rights, gender equality, and yes, I'll repeat, separation of church and state. Those Christians are deemed right-wing reactionaries. Never mind that the Kataëb party, for instance, associated with those right-wing reactionary rich Christians, has a not insignificant official name, which is the Social Democratic Party of Lebanon. But who's paying attention to names? Now, the Kataëb party is by no means a candidate for sainthood. Okay, like nobody is a candidate for sainthood in Lebanon. Like many other Lebanese political parties, it has had its share of lapses and failures and shortcomings. But the Kataëb is one of the oldest political parties in Lebanon. It stands for parliamentary constitutional democracy. It is the party that introduced to Lebanon a social security system, a 40-hour work week, paid holiday leave, paid vacations, gender equality, universal suffrage. Women clinched the right to vote in Lebanon in 1947, long before their counterparts could do so in Monaco in 1962, in Portugal in 1968, in Switzerland, a country that is compared to Lebanon, or a country that Lebanon compares itself with. Universal suffrage did not become the norm until 1971 in Switzerland. Liechtenstein was in 1984. Women could vote in Liechtenstein, in the heart of Europe, not until 1984. So the Kataëb also introduced to Lebanon other such left-wing values as paid leave, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, or freedom from religion, and again, for the third time, separation of church and state. Et j'en passe. There are many, many others. But fallacies persist if you let them persist. Nowhere is this left-wing Muslim versus right-wing Christian fallacy better described and dismantled than if you're interested in Theodor Hanf's work on Lebanon, one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most thoughtful, perspicacious social scientists to write on modern Lebanon today. The right-wing rich Christian versus the left-wing poor Muslim cliché, he noted, is the outcome not of Lebanese realities, but of, quote, social fantasies correlated with the analyst's political convictions and ideological motivations, end quote. A historian of Lebanon, William Harris, agrees, noting that to describe Lebanese Christians as right-wing and their Muslim counterparts as left-wing is to mislead and distort, as it is indeed Lebanon's Christians who flooded modern Lebanon, and by osmosis the modern Near East, flooded them with liberal progressive notions of secularism, democracy, gender equality, pluralism, and diversity of perspectives, end quote. So please do me a favor, before virtue signaling and before lecturing people on right-wing and left-wing and sectarianism and civil government in Lebanon, try to liberate yourselves from your own sectarian baggage and from making wild, unsubstantiated assumptions on someone's philosophical and partisan predilections based on their Christian-sounding names. Please. Thank you for sticking around. Ciao.